I think so far the Future Literacy podcast has been in German. Today we're doing it in English. Maybe you want to shortly introduce yourself for listeners, i.e. viewers. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a business information major and literature major by education. Never thought I would end up in legal tech of all places, but kind of, came to have that position in the legal department of Burda, which is a media and technology company based in Munich and Offenburg, Germany. We do a range of different business products, business models. We have magazines, we have online platforms, we have a recruiting network, all these things. And we now have a legal department of 14 people, which grew rapidly over the last few years. And I have been lucky enough to fill the position of legal tech and operations in that legal department for the last 2 years.
Okay, awesome. Can you maybe, today we wanted to talk about knowledge retention, and not just knowledge retention, but also organizing, let's say, Hive Mind know-how. And your specific question was, how can you do so within a team, right? Is there a specific way that the group that you work for already does it? Do they have kind of like a standard that they're working with, or is it more on a team by team basis?
So our team of 14 is divided in 3 kind of sub teams. So you have that level of added complexity that it's not only just you and the 4 people you're working with, but the whole team, and then also the decision what is relevant for whom. What we're doing right now is a folder in a shared drive, which we call knowledge base. And then we have all the contract templates and some other knowledge material, which we think might be useful in the future. There's no tagging. There's also not a lot of updating the thing, because we recently set this up, I think like a year ago, maybe. Before that, we had nothing. Basically, everybody had their own personal OneDrive and then storing their contract templates there. And it's like their intellectual property, so nobody else is allowed to see that. So even having the shared folder was kind of a step forward for us, but there's no tagging and things like that. No, not really a standard. It's just a shared place where people can go to if they remember to do so.
Okay. And I mean, I'm guessing the group is relatively big. It's not a 60,000 people enterprise, but it's still relatively big. I'm guessing they do have like an intranet with certain news sharing, these type of standards, right?
Yeah, a bit of context on Burda. So one of our key terms, which we define ourselves with, or Leitspruch, as you would call it in German, is you're an entrepreneur inside a bigger company. So for a long time, everybody was only responsible for their own business unit or business structure or entity, which brought with it a lot of freedom for the different business units, but also a lot of drawbacks in terms of, we were super decentralized, and there was definitely never any kind of knowledge sharing in a structured way between the different entities. So everybody was doing their own, content management and IT and all of these things. So group-wise, we don't really have a shared knowledge management in the different entities. Yes, maybe there's like centers of excellence or kind of initiatives like that.
Are they shared horizontally, these centers of excellence?
No.
Also not, okay.
No,
so it's not
even
like
inside a unit, because these units might be like Burda Forward, for example, a company with like 800 employees. They have these centers of excellence. They did an interesting thing. They organized their whole entity after Clayton Christensen's and the job to be done. So they don't have IT or they don't have business intelligence as a unit in their entity. They only have a job which is entertain me or inform me, like the jobs which they fulfill for their users. These are the departments, and then each of the departments has their own IT guy or their own business intelligence guy. And the centers of excellence are just to connect the different IT guys or BI guys.
But it also means that the company is super user, let's say customer focused then, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, that entity for sure. But that's just one of our subsidiaries which have this center of excellence thing, but we are not at a point where we would share the knowledge which is generated in the BI teams or the BI center of excellence at Border Forward with the different units in Border, which are doing different things.
Okay. I know it like initially sounds chaotic, I guess, the way that you describe it, but it probably has a lot of upsides as well, versus very centralized, rigid structures.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. That's why we did it, and we were running with this model for years very successfully because each of the different units had so much power and freedom also to act very agile, as you would call it, but that was like 30 years ago, but we were still living like that. And just bringing out new products, deciding on new things without having a lot of red tape. And a strong holding, which was kind of interfering. So we used to have a very lean holding structure. And now very recently that has changed because obviously you have more regulation and it just doesn't make sense if each of the units come up with their own solutions for GDPR and things like that. So now we have a stronger holding than we used to have before.
Okay, but that's a decision, a clear strategic decision that the head office or the holding made, that where they said like there's certain areas where we're now going to take over.
Yeah.
Unilateral direction, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting model, and I've always thought, or not always, obviously, not since I was 6 years old, but I've thought about this a lot, also in, let's say, strategic reorganizations of companies. What is the better way of going about, right? A couple of years ago, two and a half years ago, I spoke to the head of legal at Alberts. It's a large industrial group. They have a very specific strategic direction. They say they purchase smaller manufacturers that fit within their group profile, and they basically change nothing. They just let them run. So
what about shared services? Finance, accounting.
That was my first question as well. And they said like, no, they just let them. They let them keep their software. They let them keep their, like their own. And sometimes, of course, if these smaller entities say like, hey, can we integrate or, but it has to be like a proactive ask. Okay.
What about employee management, like, I don't know, an Active Directory?
There's certain things, not even that. So like not even system management, none of that. And they're operating extremely successfully. And now I know obviously like audit will be, centralized. Like that's what because still you're responsible for that company now. So like, you want to do an audit, like is the identity access management being done according to standards? Yes or no? Like these type of things. Sure. I was talking to the head of legal and I was like, I'll approach it from a different perspective. Like a lot of the times they say like, like my span of control is big, therefore I am important. Right. And his approach was very refreshing to see because he said like, no, we do tell all of the entities like, hey, look, if you want, we're there for you. If you want, we have certain standards, like contractual standards, all of this. If not, please try to stick to these rules. And they kind of have like the 10 commandments, right? But like the 10 legal commandments. So like they try to keep it super easy. And they said like, that's kind of what we try to have them follow. But not more. And again, like they will do a corporate audit. So they will do an audit. And if there's findings, these companies will have to fix it. And if they then say like, yeah, okay, that's a lot of work. Like, can we maybe, can you do it from a corporate perspective? Then they say like, sure, we can. But it also means that the holding is extremely lean. So and they're extremely successful. And of course, like if the company like that they purchase is not very, like economically not very viable, they will rationalize certain things. So they say like, okay, what can we integrate and like what should we rationalize? But usually there's not much. It's a bit of management, like you change a couple of figureheads left and right, like you cut some of the middle management, you make sure that they keep their customer focus and their product focus. And to me, it was so refreshing because the thing that I had seen up until that point was very strong corporates, very strong head offices. All of the, satellite offices hated head office, like, like they call it head office disease. And to me, it sounds that, the company that you're working for is a bit more like Albert's than it would be like a traditional corporate.
Yeah, we definitely used to be. And also these were not acquired companies, or some of them were, but some were just like somebody had an idea and they did that. And then we formed like a legal entity around it, and that was their own thing. And yeah, all the power to the managing director of that legal entity, which worked really, really well. I think it still works well. And then at some point we just came to a decision between, okay, we now have to implement, let's say, GDPR, either all of the different units, like I think we have 400 legal entities just in Germany, do it themselves, or we do it in the holding centrally. So that's what we did. And
how did it work out?
Okay-ish, I would say. I don't think any company was happy about GDPR, except the ones which made a business model out of it. So
sure,
nobody, like with our solution, which we found, nobody is like, oh yeah, this is the best thing that ever happened to Border, because it's definitely not. But we now have a corporate data privacy department, which is like 10 people or something. And then in each unit, you have kind of coordinators for data privacy. And then, they kind of...
But from a project perspective, did it work out well? Like, was it well received also in the separate units?
I wasn't around at that time, so I don't really know. I wasn't involved in that. But yeah, I think it's working all right. It was a quick solution because also there was time pressure because this was coming, so everybody kind of knew, okay, whether or like it or not, it's necessary. And that's what the data privacy department is not connected to the legal department though, and also compliance is separate and information security is also separate. So it's all just like very fragmented in the holding as well.
Oh, okay. And because we were talking about basically Hive Mind, right? Like, how do you share? I mean, split it up between regulatory requirements, keeping the lights on type of information, like people, you need to know this, you must act in accordance with X, i.e., therefore this information must be pushed, and information that you kind of want to share because you see a certain loss in 10 people basically picking up the same initiative 10 times. So like, oh, we want to do something with AI. 10, 20 people have the same idea. They start 10, 20 initiatives within the company. Nobody's kind of looking across departments to see if others are working on it. So like, those are two different, to me, maybe people see it as the same. They say information is information. Doesn't matter if it's, like you must or this would be good too. But like stepping aside from that, so if you look at GDPR, it is apparently centralized in the company. How is information on that shared? Like, is there a central place where you can find information on it when you were onboarded? Did you get a certain, training or what happened?
I think they use, again, this is not my department, but they use Confluence.
Okay.
They have a huge wiki on Confluence with like hundreds of pages, which they update.
Did you ever read it?
No. I was sent links to it and I refused to read the text because it's just like, I talked to people in the business when I started just to get a sense of like what was working, what was not working. And people were just like, Elizabeth, anything like longer than 3 sentences or like half a page, I will not read. I refuse to read this. So yeah.
They're like TikTok videos.
Exactly. End users are not reading it. The expectance is that the data privacy coordinators or managers are reading it and then kind of distilling the content to their business units.
Okay. I mean, fair enough. It's the age-old question. Like when I was still working for the bank, we had a similar discussion, let's say it like that. And the discussion also centered around, we can write massive wikis. You can purchase any tool that you want, whether it's Confluence or you actually use an open source wiki, which is just as good, or, whatever you use. It's not about recording the information. It's about actually finding the end user. And I don't know what your experience is so far, but what we usually encountered is that the people responsible for that information kind of said like, yeah, but it's everybody's, like the users must go here and they must read it. And fair, there's kind of like a push and pull principle at work there. And I always tell, also if we do trainings for customers, we always say pull is an important principle, right? Like if you're going to start something, there's also a responsibility on you to find the information that is required, right? Like if you start a project, it's kind of on you to find like what the project standards are within the company. How does budgeting work? These type of things. Like you cannot just sit back and expect people to educate you. On the other hand, what you're saying is, in my opinion, right? In my opinion, absolutely correct. You cannot expect everybody to read pages and pages and pages of information, especially when it's, in a business context. Like you want an answer to a certain question.
Yeah. In the legal department, we try to pick up on that and kind of come more from the side of information should come to the user in the moment and in the place where the user needs this. So, for example, when I'm, about to sign a contract and I'm not sure who is allowed to sign that contract, when I shouldn't have to go into my legal entity management tool to look up all the signatories, but I should see the signatories for the specific entity right there I am, because obviously in my Active Directory or something, there is the information which is my legal entity. So we should be able to just provide that information to the user then and there and not expect him to, hunt down a person who can give him access to the tool and then log into the tool and then reset the password and then maybe they can look at the signatories.
Yeah. I fully agree. I would agree because that's kind of what we do. Information at the right place. What we don't do is what we discussed earlier, actually, before we started the podcast, on how do you transfer regular know-how, like notes, ideas. How do you share that? How do you transfer that? How do you record it? And how do you make sure that it doesn't necessarily get lost, right? And I think the interesting part here is also how do you make connections? Because you might be an expert in field X, which might not immediately be perceived as relevant for a project when it is started. So how will people find you, right? Or how will people find the thoughts that you've maybe collected? And this has always been an interesting topic for me. Why? Because if you want to run a company successfully, if you want to run it strategically, successfully and long term, you want to make sure that the people actually find each other, right? And a long time ago, 3 years ago or so, we actually thought about it. Was admittedly after a couple of beers, we thought about creating an application, kind of like a smartphone application, but like for player cards, right? Like you would have like a player profile, and your player profile would be updated. So you would have your name, the department, but that's not so important. But more important would be your skills. For instance, you say like, I'm super great at, throwing axes or something. Like stupid shit like that would also be in there, right? But also your skill level, and you could like upskill. Kind of, I don't know if you've ever played like computer games like FIFA or these type of things. When you do enough training, you get like these extra points if you do a lot of jogging, etc., etc. And we're thinking of creating these player cards, right? And I'd be like, okay, I'm starting a project. The project is about data. We want to introduce a new large language model, but we don't know how to deploy it. So we need somebody who has
the skill set to do that.
A certain skill set in infrastructure. Then we need somebody who knows something about, like the
project management.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you could kind of see, okay, which player cards are there. It's kind of like a fantasy football team, right?
Yeah.
But then on corporate level.
Yeah.
And so we played around with this. That's one part of the information that would basically create that link that you would normally never find. And that's also when the idea started, is like, okay, the information is not like the information recording is not so much the thing. So you could write it down in Confluence, or you can write it down in a Word file or on a sticky note, but the actual linking of the information, like if you find that sticky note, how do you know it relates to, something else that might be interesting to the person?
Yeah.
So that's to me still something that, we obviously haven't figured out yet how to do it properly. And we're a small company. So like, I wouldn't know how to do it in a large company.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of pinnacle of knowledge sharing, and especially knowledge sharing, which is kind of not written down anywhere, because like I've been around for, 3-4 years in the company. People who work with me, they have a rough idea what Elizabeth can do or what she cannot do. But it's not written anywhere, like not even in the personal OneNote, whatever. It's just like hidden knowledge, which people have, but it's not really standardized or just, published ever. So that would be kind of the end goal, kind of, to have that, and for teams maybe.
Plus the people know about you what they know because of projects, right? But they don't know that maybe, I'm just going to say something really unrelated, but like they might not know that you're a great ballet dancer, or like, like you can, Kung Fu or something. And I know that like initially it doesn't seem like it relates to business skills, but a lot of the time it does.
Yeah.
And, like, or I don't know, like you have language skills or whatever it is. And that's not recorded. And not just because it's not recorded, but also because it's not like, if also those people that you worked with, they leave the company, the knowledge is gone, right?
Yeah. We had an interesting case where we were thinking about knowledge transfer, because the legal department didn't always exist. We used to not have a legal department because there was an external law firm who was doing all of our legal matters. They were basically in-house, but it was always an external law firm, and it still is an external law firm. And then a couple of years back, we kind of started insourcing things. We started with M&A at corporate, which is kind of not the usual thing to do because most other things you outsource, but we're really good at that. So we did that. And then commercial. So please write me an NDA, or can you check this license agreement? Things like that. We only really started insourcing 2 years ago. So that's still quite fresh. And then we had one area which was trademark management, which is super important for Burda because we have, 1,000 trademarks. And that was only managed in the external law firm. And we were kind of going step by step, building up the database with a tool and catalogizing like all the trademarks that we have, which works really well. But then all the kind of metadata to that, so not even how many nice classes or how many whatever like the hard information on the trademarks, we had that, but just the informal data on that. So 20 years ago, this brand or this trademark was established because we wanted to go to Georgia and build a new magazine there, but then we kept the trademark even though the project failed because the managing director of XYZ said we should keep it. So that information is only with our external law firm because they managed it for us.
But
and we try to insource that information.
How do they save that? Where do they write that down? Is it
in their head? It's like one lawyer who has been there for a long, long time and basically running our whole trademark management system for a long time. And he's not going to do that forever. And we have the tool where we can store information. But the question now is like, how do you get this very unstructured data into Burda and store it in a way where people can find it and work with it? And we haven't found a solution to that. We're just, we're obviously talking to him all the time, but the goal would be to have that information somehow, somewhere. We're not quite ready yet. And then if he were to leave, that information obviously would leave.
I was going to say, it's quite, I'm not going to say a massive operational risk, but it is a bit of a risk.
Yeah, that's why we started the whole thing, like the whole insourcing. And now we have, so the hard data, we have all our register of trademarks. We have every piece of information which you can kind of store in a normal table like database to the trademark. We have it, but just any information which goes beyond that, we have it as long as we have him, and then not anymore.
Do you employ any, let's say, new technologies to retrieve information or to index information?
In what sense?
So, is the company looking at retrieval augmented generation, for instance, for data retrieval?
What kind of data?
This type of metadata. So you say, look, we have a database, we have trademarks. Like, you could potentially record the information, like, why did we apply for this trademark? Like, why do we have it? What was the original thought behind it? Why did we decide to keep it? Like, this type of information you could save, right? But it would be prosa. It's unstructured data in the end.
Yeah.
The database itself is structured data, but the prosa is unstructured data.
Yes.
The question is, of course, like, not everybody is just going to look for the trademark in the database, but you might want to find all trademarks that we originally applied for because of reason X, right? And then at that moment, you need a system to transform this unstructured know-how into like a structured, let's say, index or set.
Yeah. So kind of like a topic-wise tagging thing of like.
Or like auto labeling, or what you could do is, like, you could set up like an Elasticsearch type of tech, or you could introduce that you could actually search through these through the actual content. Is that something that you or somebody within the company is thinking about, not just for this database, but for basically all these separated databases?
I have no overview at all over all the separated databases at Border. Like, I only know the tools and things like I'm working with, which is like, I don't know, 20 tools maybe, and I know that not a single one of them is connected.
Okay.
So I can only speak for that. I think we're still trying to like tackle the core principles of, maybe if I have a database of my legal entities and these legal entities show up in different systems, maybe we should have a common index for our legal entities. Like, that's the stage we're at. And then if we can enrich the databases with like more information later on, that would be nice. But I would like to,
go a step further.
The basic information straight and then enhance on that.
It's probably also, I don't know, obviously, because I don't know the company, right? But it's, at least from a standardization perspective, I always think it starts by educating everybody on how to take notes, how to write down information, how to link information. I mean, I showed you shortly before, like, I use Obsidian. Why do I use it? Because it does the linking so well. It's not fully open source, but like for personal use, it's for free. I guess for companies, they charge something, but it's not crazy. But what makes it so powerful is that you can constantly link and backlink everything, right? So like, if you would have a standard of recording information and you say like, okay, if we record a trademark, you have to, record reason, original request, like a couple of these type of things. And you would say, link it also to entity and link it to X. At that moment, you could easily find back the information once you, in 20 years even approach it. But yeah, so like, for me, standardization is probably the first step. But yeah, how do you teach 4,000 people, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the challenges we have. Also, just like historic processes, and in German you would call it gewachsene Strukturen. So yeah, we are doing this because we already did it like this, and yeah, that's how this very inefficient process came to be. So that's the difference in, like, if I had a clean slate, I wouldn't rely so heavily just, I don't know, on the basic Microsoft things, because then I would look at the market and be like, okay, what can we use which is actually really tackling our core problems, and then maybe 20 problems that we would have in 20 years or use cases. But that's not where we are, because we have so many different, just outgrown tools and things where you kind of have to take a step back and then just find one common infrastructure for 2 business units so that they can communicate with each other and maybe share data in the same format. So just, trying to clean up old processes and then at the same time establishing things which are not just the standard thing, but also setting up for opportunities for later on.
The question is also always, how much of a pain is it really? Like, do people perceive it as a pain, or do they really, just go about their business? How much impact does it really have? Like, does it have perceivable business impact? Does it hamper the company in their growth, in their targets? Because if it doesn't, then, like how much sense does it make to actually want to rationalize this knowledge and this information sharing in the end?
Yeah.
Because just from my perspective, or from our perspective, maybe we're a very small tech company, right? But even we realized relatively early, like, oh my God, like we're recording, like the platform descriptions somewhere else, like we're not standardizing it. It's mostly a time issue, because everybody had like 5 hats on and, like different roles, and you're constantly kind of fighting, like, well, the number of hours in a day, really. So even for us at a very, very early time, it became very important to start to standardize this type of stuff. And we're not there. I can be very honest. Like, it's not that we found like a perfect way. So even in a company that's smaller than 20 people, we do have a very complex, let's say, broad product. So like there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of information and know-how. But even there, like it's I wouldn't say it's a mess, but it's definitely not structured not as structured as we want it to be. And for us, it came quite early that it bit us in the ass.
How early was that?
I would say like already in year 2, we kind of started to notice that we didn't record original thought, for instance, like why did we want to develop this? Like what led to this decision at the time? And of course you can remember, but you also kind of change the perception. So like your perception changes, kind of like, like you witness a murder or something that's like, eyewitnesses are terrible at repeating information.
Yeah.
It's also for us, 2 years pass, like, oh, did we do this for a customer, or like what was the original? Did we ask enough questions? Yeah, it came back to bite us in the ass quite early. And of course, if you're in a big company, you can cover it up more easily.
Cover it up in what sense?
There's more people to kind of provide that buffer for that inefficiency. So like there's natural inefficiencies that you take for granted, and people are like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't care. Like that NDA, whatever. I have it on my desktop. I'll just grab it from there, or I'll just call a colleague, and the colleague says, oh yeah, let me look. And like
at some point you get to the NDA. Yeah, I wouldn't say cover it up, because everybody knows, or like everybody knows the status quo, but it's just, as I said, it's always been that way. And I was always calling my colleague if I needed the specific thing. And if he's on leave, then I will wait for 2 weeks, because it's not written anywhere. And
so that's what I mean with like covering up, right? Like it's not covering up like I'm trying to cover it up on purpose,
but you get
more like
because it's just how it is.
Yeah, you cover up the inefficiencies basically with just the way it is, exactly. And I think in a way a smaller company doesn't get away with this as much, because you can't. Like everybody's relying on like a super lean way of operating.
How did you establish your first knowledge sharing in your company then?
We
While running the business and doing everything at once.
we started with OneNote. It was horrible.
But was it horrible because of a tool or because of the structure?
The tool is just, it's, everybody can edit. No, not just the tool, also the people and the structure and the way that we set it up. Of course, like it's a culmination of things, but OneNote is just not made to be an actual knowledge base. For that, you can better look at like a wiki type of tool.
Yeah.
Whether that's, we've looked at open source wikis, we've looked at some other open source tools. In the end, we settled on Notion because we can also create customer dashboards in that. And these, like, the Notion is far from perfect. It's way too expensive for what it is. But for us, it's the tool of choice now.
Yeah. Would you see, or would you think it feasible for a team or company to use what you are doing in Obsidian? Like an actual timeline-wise?
No, I don't think
way.
so. I don't think so. Like, I think that works for smaller teams. Like if you have 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
Like what you called like a center of excellence type of thing. Probably for a setup like that, like also more like-minded. You're working on a topic, of course, there's some divergence. I think that would work very well. From my perspective, Obsidian is also not a tool that was created for locking in information. It's really just, it's markup text. That's it.
Yeah.
And people still hang. I really think a wiki type of tool is the best for like a type of outgoing knowledge sharing. If you combine that with a proper search tool, like or search technologies like Elastic, and if you pack retrieval augmented generation on top of that, I think you'll probably have the perfect setup. And there's plenty of open source wiki tools, but again, you need to establish standards, because you might read a 50-page wiki page if you're super interested in a topic, but if it's a massive page on data privacy, you're not going to read it, right? But like good index, these type of things, and some writing standards, proper owners, people that can collaboratively edit. So basically Wikipedia for a company that can really work. I've seen Confluence being used very successfully. My personal opinion about Atlassian as a company is probably, the reason why we don't use it. But I think that is the ideal combination, because you can use it both for technical documentation, you can use it for commercial documentation. You could even link documents if you wanted to. I'm not a fan of using documents at all. I don't think any company needs to use documents. I just don't think it's necessary.
That's the first time I'm hearing that from a lawyer, but
yeah. I think it's ridiculous. Like, documents are outdated. Like Word documents, I know that Microsoft is trying to put like a very pretty face on it with, Copilot and everything, but that's really putting lipstick on a pig. It's an outdated format, in like saving individual documents and PDFs and these type of things. You could go into any company and you could radically change it overnight and business would not be hampered. Nobody needs documents. That's it. You can work in Markdown, or you can work in, like any type of course you need a word processor. You need to be able to type and write. But all makeup around that, we want to have this font, and like we need to have this letterhead and all of that, it's unnecessary. What you're communicating is information, right?
Yeah, but I get where you're coming from. I just don't think a lot of companies are there yet.
No.
And definitely not my company.
No.
Which is fine.
Sure.
Like we're not that different from other normal functioning legal departments. We are running projects for formatting our legal contracts nicely, just because that's a requirement, because everybody in our team is like golden magic circle educated, like from big law firms, and you have standards there, and people learn this in the beginning of a career, and then they do that. So yes, technically you could get rid of that, but I think change management wise, it's just we are not there yet.
Forget.
So it's not like, I like the idea. It's nice, but it's so far away from the problems or the tasks or whatever I'm doing, like on a day-to-day basis, that it's just not something I would prioritize right now.
Nah, and it's not like what you're saying, like change from a change management perspective, it's not feasible. But the fact that people don't even realize this, like, oh yeah, like talk to any, like lawyer in a law firm, and they're like, oh yeah, Microsoft Word, like we need this. It's like, no, you really don't. And it's, of course, when people had typewriters and the first computer came about, and they were like, yeah, like, but we need this physical piece of paper. Like, this is super important. Like, no, it's not. And I think that switch is probably going to take 20, 30 years, but the realization that you're working from a document and not data, i.e. you're working from a very containerized piece of knowledge instead of accessible, structured data, is also standing in the way of a lot of things. So not just the finding back that know-how that you've stored somewhere. And like you said, like already certain parts of companies, like if you're talking about knowledge management, if you're talking about, that department who, stores all of their know-how in Confluence, that part, that link people already made. And, like Wikipedia is to thank for that. Like, like an entire generation grew up with Wikipedia, blogs, these type of, so seeing knowledge in such a format and not in a book format anymore, or just random PDFs laying about, has already been generally accepted, because the first user net groups came about 30, 35 years ago, right? Or earlier, if you think about pre-internet. So even the outgoing generation, I mean, out of the professional sphere, like, like who are now basically in the fall years of their lives, the autumn years of their lives, they even grew up with these, like weblogs and all of these type of things. So for them, having knowledge in certain space definitely is, they can relate. So they don't need that, or like, we need knowledge in books or encyclopedias or something, No, that's not necessary. But really the next step is to get like a whole generation just understanding that you don't need documents anymore. You might need a clear, like border around something, so that you say like, this is the information and it's locked, so it's unchangeable, it's immutable. But I personally don't see it changing very fast, because it's also, even the new generation is educated, like university education, or you're educated in these tier 1 law firms or other BCG, McKinsey, whatever. They're working outdated. Yeah. And I might get some comments on this, but let's see. But their ways of working are extremely outdated, especially when it concerns like this type of thing. But also our customers, they ask us, can you please send a PDF? Can you send that in a document?
Yeah. Like, I mean, what you're calling outdated is what other people, like, I don't know, work of BCG or Bain or McKinsey is like, what's a gold standard for everything? So where do you, like, except for this conversation, where do you see that change starting in a broader way, that actually companies, or you can find two companies which agree on not exchanging documents, but just data in like another format? And it's not just two startups sitting in the hub.
That's an easy answer. Like, as soon as the pain becomes big enough, as soon as you will stop finding, as soon as people start refusing, like, look, like, I'm not going to work in this template, stop it, right? Lidl at some point, I don't know if this is correct, maybe it's just an urban myth, or maybe it was Aldi, I don't know. They introduced like a new standard, and they said PowerPoint presentations, no colors anymore. They had like the template was just title, maximum six sentences with maximum 12 words or something, and like no images, like no makeup, no layout. Yeah, if you needed to use stats or graphs or these type of things, you could put it in, but that was it.
Yeah.
And they, again, not sure if it's an urban myth. I've never checked, but from a theoretical perspective, like this makes a lot of sense, because if you see how much time people burn, like literally waste on this color, like
in PowerPoint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't hurt the bottom line of the company, nobody's gonna change that, right? Like,
yeah,
who cares? Like, it needs to look pretty. Like, and sure that you waste a week on creating this report, whatever. Like, we don't feel it in our bottom line. But as soon as you start feeling it in your bottom line, or the competition is moving that way and it's making a serious impact, then people start to look. Until that time, the theory is correct. Yeah, it's outdated. But the need to change is not there at all.
Yeah, but we have been, let's say, the consultancies and every major firm in the Western world has been working with, I don't know, let's say PowerPoints, which are nicely aligned for decades now. I don't know what PowerPoint
We can align. That's fine.
But I don't know. So obviously, the way you put it, the pain is already there, but nobody has yet seen the need to change from that. So where would be the moment where that switches? Because obviously there's like rising cost pressure all the time, but still we are, I don't know, spending a lot of time fixing the outlook and the layout of our contracts, because that's how it's supposed to be done. Like, this is not the first thing people are wanting to touch when we are trying to save costs, save money, whatever. But even though it would be a big chunk, but it's just not, it's like the holy cow. Like, it's not
you don't touch it. Like, that's you don't touch it. But that's the point why I say also documents. Let's forget PowerPoint for a second. But let's talk about documents. That's the whole point. In a document, you're wasting a lot of time on formatting. If you just have an actual digital standardized format, you don't need to waste time on formatting anymore because it's standardized. And there's always a supplier-customer type of thing as well, right? If you're sending something to a customer, you kind of also want to make a good impression. It's like, okay, it needs to look nice, spiffy, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I always hear from my lawyers is that our customers, which are mostly internal customers, but then also the counterparty, they are not able to read the document or understand the document, but they can judge it based on its appearance. And if the formatting is nice, then they will value it higher than if it's like...
It's like 100 years ago. If your paper was thicker, then, like...
It feels more worthy.
It's exactly. Like, oh my God, look at them. They, like value the weight of the paper.
Yeah.
Sure.
So where's the change coming from?
Still, like if you do an outside of, let's say, a word processor document, whether that's Microsoft Word or OpenOffice or whatever you're using, it doesn't need to look shit. You just don't need to create these separate documents anymore. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can still work with nice headers. You can still work with nice formatting. But, instead of constantly creating document on document on document, version on version on version, you can do so digitally so that information is also centrally accessible.
Yeah.
And you're saving the data, not the document, and the document doesn't start to lead its own life. And that's also the point, is like, if you have a template that's an actual digital template, but not like a document that is, copied 500 times, laying around on a SharePoint, then somebody's desktop, then in the email. I think, Elizabeth sent me that template last year. Let me quickly look it up. Oh, I'll download it from the, from my...
As you do.
As you do, exactly. And I think as soon as... And then the interesting thing is, how do people solve problems, right? People solve problems usually by let's say, I see a problem, like, and immediately they jump to conclusions. So they say like, okay, we need a centralized database where we save these templates. That's not a solution because people never want to log into that database. They may do it once to get the original template, but then say like, okay, done. Now I have it saved somewhere. So instead of thinking about it and saying, look, if we want to become an all digital company and we want to save a lot of time and actually like reduce risk, you could do that. We've done so, or many companies have done so for their internal wikis, right? Whether that's an intranet page or whether that's a Confluence page or these type of, sources. So that when you edit the information, you edit it centrally. The edit is visible. And when people visit it, they see the most recent thing. Like nobody's going to Confluence and say like, let me create a PDF from this data protection information and save it on my desktop so that I can open it at a later point in time. They're like, no, I know where it is. I know where to access it. I can find it through an easy search. Most of the time. So that knowledge is readily available. If you have your other assets also available through a similar means, then you can actually start thinking about, like digitization of the company. But yeah, I think when does change happen? When something hurts enough, or when the solution brings so much to the actual user. Like when users say, oh my God, like this is like an improvement of the comfort of my life. People are lazy. Like people are ultra lazy, in fact. Like people stopped buying, DVDs not because the DVD itself was not good, because I don't want to get up from my couch to walk that 2 meters to my DVD player and, change the DVD in there. That's how lazy we are.
Yeah. Also, we love the status quo. So I think like from the two options you brought up, pain point versus you have just a surplus of value with a new solution, it's probably going to be the latter, just because we've been living with like a lot of pain points all the time. Also, we love complexity because complexity is kind of addictive. I don't know why, but
it also gives you power.
Yeah, probably. But definitely at some point when there is like an established enough solution that like enough companies use it, whatever, then you would also get the last movers.
Or you get the Napoleonic, you go the Napoleonic way. You just force it top down. You say like, okay, this is what we're going to do now. Done.
Yeah, and if you're the head of whatever department and there's like 50 FTEs hanging on this old standard way of doing things, why would you propose that change and let go of like 50 people?
No, sure, then forget it. But that's what I'm saying. Like either you force it, you provide a lot of value, or something hurts so much that they start looking at it like much other. Yeah, I don't see. I mean, if you're the head of a department of 50 people and you know that if audit is going to come around and you're going to get, like a huge finding on your name if you do not use tool X or, change process Y, then for sure you're going to change it. Or if your bonus depends on it, or, but then there's enough incentive.
Yeah. Our way of dealing with like new regulation or audits or whatever has always been to add more people and more processes and more complexity. And that's kind of where we're standing at. And now the problems are actually getting so big and the pain points are getting so big that we have to take a step back and be like, okay, let's rethink the whole process.
Rationalize.
And make it different. But we're not there yet.
And I think also like rationalization is a bit of a dirty word in companies, because a lot of people equate it with like, oh, we're going to fire people and like people are going to lose like power over their kingdoms and queendoms. I don't know. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Like middle management can be incentivized properly. But yeah, knowledge is power. And this is also why like proper knowledge management, to incentivize people to actually record and share that's a cultural thing. And I think, like Berkshire Hathaway and these type of like Charlie Munger is a great, like, if people want to read up, like, I think Charlie Munger is a great source of inspiration if you think about company culture, right? I think he once got the question, I don't even know where, but their company principles were very clear. Like, he was always open about it. And he said, like, the success of, Berkshire Hathaway was intrinsically tied to those principles. And then somebody asked him, like, yeah, why don't other companies just take these principles and live it? Like, introduce that culture, live that culture. For him, it was clear, like he said, it's bureaucracy in the end. Like, bureaucracy is power to certain people, and they don't have incentive to change that.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, like, you're going to get that in any type of company, of course, that people want to hang on to certain
ways of doing things.
Yeah, and know-how. It's because, like, maybe you have like you're ahead on new technology X. Like, oh my God, you've, like, watched 20 videos more on AI. So you're now like the internal expert.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden somebody's brought in from external and they're like, hey, they're here to, like, make some changes. And you're like, hey, I was supposed to be, so incentives in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how we're going to change it, to be honest.
Me neither. But I'm willing to embrace the change once it comes our way and has enough movement, let's say, to, be adapted. I just don't think that change will originate in, I don't know, the regulatory departments of companies who have been around for 100 years, just because it's like the obstacles there are just not in the favor of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think compliance... Also, like, compliance can see themselves as a business enabler or not.
We try to, but then how do you, I don't know, like, when you go into the other topic of, okay, we have so much like day-to-day work, whatever, busy work, and then at the same time we're trying to set up compliance as a business or legal as a business, and actually having smart processes and tools and running, like, efficiently. So yeah, you're always kind of in that crunch between the two requirements from a business. And I think that's also why a lot of, compliance or data privacy or legal departments are not really seen as the business enablers we want to be, just because it's, the willingness might be there, but the means of achieving that might not be sufficient. And also just like, the knowledge of how to do that, or the skill set of how to do that.
A close contact of mine recently said he came from a banking environment, from the front office, and he said if he didn't want something to happen, he said, did you already talk to compliance about this? And he said, like, from that moment on, he knew it would at least be delayed for a year and a half or something. And that's an interesting part, because I saw a change from very close by. Like, I started in I worked for a Dutch bank, and I saw from very close by what a change in head of compliance made versus, let's say, the German compliance organization. So, like, the Dutch compliance organization was kind of like the German compliance organization at the time, i.e. everything was difficult. Yeah, everything was always difficult. Not possible, like, we need to look at that, etc., etc. And then the head of compliance changed in the Dutch organization, and the new head, she had a completely different view on things, and she radically changed that department, I think, in a couple of months' time. And all of a sudden, every initiative was not necessarily green lit, but at least was met with enthusiasm. They said, look, we're gonna make this work. We don't know yet how. We're gonna make it work. And that changed the entire perception of the organization, but also all of a sudden people actually wanted to start projects. They said, like, hey, look, can we look at that? Can we look at that? Because they knew as soon as they and they started involving compliance more, because of all of a sudden they realized, like, hey, look, we can we can avoid a lot of problems at or shortly before go live by involving them early. And then I made the change to the German organization. And, like I was reminded again about...
You were going back to the past, basically.
Yeah, it felt like... And the crazy thing was, it was only maybe 15, 16 months that I worked under the... Like, I didn't work in the compliance department, but, like, from a technology innovation perspective, we only worked 16 months or something with the new compliance department in the Netherlands. Went to the German organization, the first thing that I heard is like, yeah, CBRN, that's against the law. I'm like, yeah, I don't believe it is. Yeah, you like the Dutch, they're always, like they're way more open. I'm like, no, our laws are pretty much equal to laws here in Germany. Like there may be some small differences, but we're just as anal about, like we're just as kleinkariert, And I said, I also, like, that's not how laws are written. It's like, yeah, like, what do you know? And I said, like, okay, then send me the text of the law and like, we can look at it. And they refused to do it. So I looked it up myself. Of course, it didn't say that in law. The law just said, like, hey, you need to meet. It was about account opening, right? Oh. We wanted to do it digitally so that people could do it from their phone. Younger listeners might not even understand that you had to go into like an actual branch to open an account. But we were the first in Germany to actually offer this, and the first in the Netherlands. But they said, no, you need to meet face to face. And I said, that's not how laws are written. Like, but it was a fight. It was a fight. And it was like, I think it was like a 10-month fight before we finally got like the green light on this. And even then they warned like the Vorstand, they warned the board of directors, yeah, but if this goes wrong, this is on CBRN, And we're like, yeah, whatever, we'll take that risk. They didn't want to let go of it. So I do think that just like the attitude, like the cultural difference, just saying, not culture Dutch-German, but like the company cultural difference, like how do you go into the game, right? Like that makes a big difference. I definitely do think so. But yeah, want to round this up?
I think we've come a long way from knowledge management. But,
I don't think we're going to close the gap to knowledge management. That's for sure.
We could find a bridge, but we also don't have to do so artificially.
You wanna find a bridge? That's. I
was gonna ask how do you see knowledge management in terms of the law, as in like the law itself, and would there be potentially in the future like connections between companies who have to adhere to laws and then like the changing legal landscape, things like that?
Fuck yeah. Like, for sure. I mean, typically, I think this is one of those fields, like regulatory, like regulations, whether it's local, national, or European, or laws. These are, especially in our let's say in the countries that we operate in, like that operate according to like the French, let's say, legal system. I mean, obviously court cases play a role concerning precedent and these type of things, but if we're really looking, that's manageable, right? And I think that's where large language models and RAG will make a huge difference. I actually think our colleagues, they like their startup is
centered on making
like
commentary accessible with like a chatbot thingy.
Exactly.
They still don't want to publish the whole thing like in a digital format.
Yeah, which I understand because people take things too literally, and then if there's like a tiny mistake, people will rip on it. So I understand that they don't want to completely, go full public with it. But what I'm saying is like, I typically think that this is a perfect domain. Like users will have a simple question, right? Like, or not, maybe a difficult question. But what you want to find is snippets of information that are intrinsically linked with each other. So you want to find like maybe a piece of like the regulatory text, but you also want to find maybe the commentary behind it, and also the way up
internal
to
guidelines and what did we do in the past in our
Exactly.
company with this exact question.
And this type of knowledge is, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's relatively easy to index, to chunk, to create like a proper, database of, and to make available through RAG. And if you on top of that fine tune a large language model that would have some intrinsic knowledge, if this topic is not available over the next 5 years, then because this is the lowest hanging fruit for sure. We also thought about setting up or we're still thinking about, let's say like this. We wanted to set up the Open Regulatory Institute, with the goal of saying all regulations within the EU, let's say for a specific sector, we're going to train language models that are then openly available. So not non-commercial, but like openly available to any member. And just to make sure that, like any regular user in any company could just say like, hey, like what does this mean for me at this point? So that you could throw in your customer contract and say like, how does GDPR apply to this? Yeah, and then it can answer that. And it might not be 100% perfect, but if you combine that then with your internal guidelines, you're getting damn close to like 98, 99% accuracy. And then it will eliminate so much of the uncertainty. And because regulations in the end, either people say, fuck it and go the cowboy way and say, okay, we'll see when we get a fine. Or people go on extreme risk averse and you kind of break innovation and
yeah, you end up doing nothing, or you end up doing the things 18 months late because it took 6 months to argue over one piece of a contract.
And you're still not sure whether or not you're complying or not. So like that's also the thing. Then people are still like, okay, we think that we might have it correctly, right? And you've paid hundreds of thousands of euros to so-called experts that also only became experts because they've implemented it 5 times at different companies. And this is why, Contracto is a tech company, right? Like we build product, a solution, we do a lot of things with AI, but we're not a regulatory startup. So that's why we thought we trained one of the language models to be an expert in DORA, and it worked really well. Really well. We've solved a lot of, let's say, base problems with language models, especially the probabilistic nature of it. And then we said, okay, we can now keep that for us commercially, or you set up a new company, quote unquote, like an institute or something. And you find companies that are trying to tackle the same problem 100 times, whether it's DORA, whether it's GDPR, whether it's, any type of other regulation coming into effect. And you say, you know what, we're going to bundle our financial power and we're going to train these models so that they're publicly available. And obviously from a time perspective, that's not something that we can do right now, but it's lingering in my head. I really want to set this up.
Yeah.
And I think especially in the EU, like we have a common market. We have centralized regulatory instances. Of course, you will have local specificities, but this field lends itself perfectly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, nice bridge from a knowledge management perspective. Very, very well done. Yeah, I think this is something that we should tackle the next, let's say, 2-3 years, for sure.
Let's see.
You want to leave people with a practical next step if they want to tackle knowledge management?
Start in the heads of people and with the culture and the mindset. If you have people who refuse to share their contract template because it's their intellectual property and they don't want to share it with their colleagues, then the most advanced knowledge management sharing system won't help you. But if you have the openness and the willingness to embrace new things, then you could start with that.
I actually think I couldn't have said it better. Thank you.
Thank you.